All right. So we got Marsh Bilby here with us. And Marsh, how long have you been an appraiser?
I'm sorry?
How long have you been an appraiser?
Oh, I would say 94, believe it or not.
Years? Wow, that's amazing, Marsh.
Yeah.
You look really good for that.
Yeah.
I think that's
Something like
high
that.
school.
Yes. Not sure the math on that, but yeah. It's been a
Okay.
while. It's been an awful long time. But yeah, so a lot of experience doing it in the market. So hopefully I can add something here to the discussion.
How long have you, how long have you been a real estate agent? How long have you had your real estate license?
I got my license, I think it was 2011, but really been focusing here just the last 2 years, especially with you all. So, but probably active about 4 years.
2011, a great time to sell real estate.
Well, I wish actually I got my license originally back, I want to say maybe like 2000 and like early 2000s. And then of course I was still continuing with my appraisal business and I just let it lapse. And it's one of those things I wish would have gone back at the time. It's hindsight's 2020. I think it would have been much more successful if I would have continued on through that time frame. But happy with where we are right now.
Okay. So so you joined Keller Williams, is it just been a year ago?
It's been a year, a little over a year, about a year and a half, not even quite a year and a half probably.
Do you remember how much you grew your business in that 12 months?
A fair amount. I would say it's probably about a 50% growth from the prior year.
Yeah, I think that's what I remember it being. But
yeah.
Well, so today, we asked you to be part of this and wanted to bring you in today because doing a market analysis and doing it properly is so critical when helping a seller price their home to sell in today's market. It's also critical when working with buyers because buyers don't want to overpay. Nobody wants to overpay. Everybody wants a deal. Sellers always want to get the most money they possibly can. So understanding how to price a property is such a critical aspect of what we do. And recently I've been hearing more and more people talk about price per square foot, and I just hate that language. And I think it's very common for people to use price per square foot, but in my mind, it's like it's irrelevant to the types of properties that we actually sell. I mean, if they all were cookie cutter and looked the same, it would work. So what's your thought on price per square foot?
Well, any appraiser will tell you the same thing. It's one of our pet peeves. There is no such thing when you're going through an appraisal class or discussions. There's no discussion of sitting around and talking about price per square foot. There is some discussion perhaps about an adjusted price per square foot. For example, commercial appraisers use an adjusted price per square foot more common than a residential appraiser might. But yeah, when I hear anybody start talking about a price per square foot, whether or not it's another realtor or if I'm actually doing an appraisal and I'm presented with a CMA, describing a price per square foot, I immediately think to myself, do they really know? It doesn't add a whole lot of credibility to your position. It is a number that can very easily be skewed. For example, just be looking at the denominator of it, it's just the price per square foot. You have a small difference in that size of a property, and you can have a dramatic change in that price per square foot number. So it's really important that you adjust your comparables to reflect what the market is.
Right. Well, and I remember that specifically from real estate licensing school, all 18 years ago. I think it was 2002. Is that you take the subject property and then you look for comparable properties. And there are situations like I'm in a townhome complex, and the majority. Kathy lives in here. She'll tell me how many units there are. I think it's like 42 or something like that. But most of them, there are 3 different layouts. And so you might be able to use a price per square foot analysis if all of them hadn't been remodeled differently. So they all have different levels of updates. So now that creates a kink in that thought process. So we actually have to if we're looking at a house, we have to look at the subject property and then find properties that are comparable to those. So tell us what that process looks like from an appraiser standpoint.
Well, it's certainly the most important thing is to find the most comparable properties. And I think the things that people have to consider is really trying to find what is the motivating factor for somebody to purchase that property. Is it, in a townhouse community, for example, yeah, there's not a whole lot of variance there. So it might just be something as simple as, has it been updated or not updated? Maybe one's a 2-bedroom, maybe one's a 3 bedrooms. But when you get outside of that, there's so many other factors that come into play. It could be, just the overall living area, the site size, the views. If for example, we do a lot of waterfront properties in this market. So it's not just, for example, the site size, it might be the site frontage on the water. You might have, for example, completely exact same lot size, but dramatically different values based off the frontage. Think about a cul-de-sac type property where that is so much more desirable. You have, so much the wide expanse.
Yeah, and you might have 2 identical lots that are waterfront, and one has a brand new seawall and a swimming pool, and the other doesn't. One has a dock and the other doesn't. So those are all factors that can't be factored into price per square foot.
Correct. Absolutely. Yeah, you would. So when you're dealing with the unadjusted price per square foot, that's how you get this wide range. If you were to look at your typical CMA, you do your quick CMA that comes with MLS, you're going to get just basically a range, and it averages out the properties. Those ranges, the whys are this huge range. Well, it might be one has a pool, one's remodeled, one has dock, one has boat lifts, one has a much wider, better view. And just sort of when you're going to your client and you're trying to tell them, hey, it's worth right here, it's right in the middle, it's the median. If I'm a client and having a discussion I'm probably more of a C type person, I'm like, well, explain that to me. Why, how do you come to this? Well, mine has a open water view, or mine has all this updating. What do these other properties have? Oh, I'm familiar with another property. A lot of times homeowners are familiar with other homes in their neighborhood, and they will sit there and they'll want to fight and argue with you about, for example, if you get into this discussion about, the condition of this other home, or why theirs are superior or not. And so that's why I think it's really important to go through and spend your time and properly adjust for the differences between the properties. Now, you don't need to, I wouldn't give that out and lay that out on the table, but it is something that you want to have in your quiver. I personally keep it in, basically a rough, what I'm reviewing in my file. I'm not exactly sharing all the information with them. I'm giving them the conclusions, but I'm not, laying it out step by step, because I don't want to get into discussion about, well, my house is better or that house is not. Because oftentimes they might be familiar with other properties, and maybe more than you are.
Right. So did you, I'm not sure exactly what you had prepared for us today, because we had some conversations. Were you able to prepare like a subject property and 3 comparables that you could show us?
I didn't exactly do that. I did do a little presentation. I wasn't sure exactly what you're expecting here today, but I did do a little presentation. I can show you, sort of walk through just some of sort of the general ideas of what we talk about, and some of the general adjustments, and maybe some of the things that I see, maybe common mistakes and a lot of common questions that I might get. So
well, that would be great, because we've already got that question up here, is how do you do price adjustments? So why don't you walk us through what you've prepared for us today?
Okay, let me see if I can share.
It should be on the top, or I'm sorry, on the bottom.
What's that? Yeah. Can you see that screen?
No, we see you.
Not yet.
Hold on, here we go, hold on. How's that?
There you go.
Oh, now we got you. I'm going to have to shrink you down, though. So
he's legit with a PowerPoint and everything.
Well,
all right, Marsh.
Have you met Marsh Bilby? Of course he's legit. He's a C. Come on.
No, I actually have to give my wife some credit for this. She actually does a fair amount of these. So I gave her the content, and she put this nice picture together. I was like, wow, that was pretty good. So I have to give her the credit for the little photos and stuff that you'll see on here. But yeah, I'm glad it came out pretty well. So obviously, anyways, we're talking about the CMA, and which is really the guts of any listing presentation. you know, it really is, it's really what people want to know. So obviously there's just a portion of your listing presentations, or like say you're looking at a buyer, you know, wanting, I mean, every single property. Well, let me know, run the comps, let me see what it's worth. And so this is the process that we would go through. So little definitions, you know, what is a CMA? Important. It is an informal estimate of your market value. And really it is to determine the list prices of the properties, and or if you're looking to make an offer on the property. And it is just it's just a snapshot of where you are right at this point in time. So this is what I thought is sort of important. So what's crucial to a CMA is the accuracy, you know, in determining the market value, is the selection of the right comps. And I think I was talking about that a little bit earlier. It's, you have to really determine what is the motivating factor that you know, any buyer or is considering in the property. So there are two main reasons for an inaccurate valuations. It's not selecting a truly comparable home for comparisons, and really not properly accounting for those differences in the properties. Now, we're not always, you know, we're not fortunate enough to have exactly the same properties next door. That never happens. That only happens in the textbooks. So you have to account for these differences. And I'm going to try to talk about that a little bit more. But so here, you know, what is a comparable home? It's another home that is available at the same time that would be strongly considered to a buyer of the property, of your listing. And I've listed out multiple things that are, you know, that we consider the main things: the living areas, the bedrooms, the baths, pools. You can see what I've written here. One of the things I like to talk about especially when you're talking about a listing, is talking about what is the person, what do they love about the property, and what don't they like about the property. And I think that's sort of what you guys were talking into, you know, with some of the personality traits, is you can sort of dive into those things a little bit more. And everybody wants to talk about what they love about the property, but I think it's also very important to talk about what they don't like about the property. That probably will help you on later on down the road when you're getting feedback and you're trying to get an appropriate pricing of the property, to sort of rehash that with them. So that's for the same idea as if I'm an appraiser, you know, I'm looking at those types of things. I'm sitting there saying, well, you know, maybe it needs a new seawall, or it is dated, or the functionality of the property is not the same. You know, for example, I see a lot of things that I think is somewhat important, that talking about price per square foot. In our market, we have multiple properties where the porches might have been enclosed. Is that living area? Is that not living area? You know, how is that thing completed? How has that been finished off?
Marsh, just real quick, I wanted to say, you know, I love this slide, what is a comparable home? And I think it's very helpful for people who are doing a market analysis to think about, like, when a buyer is coming in from out of town, they're looking at the area as a whole and saying, you know, I'm looking for X. And that's what you keep talking about. You keep saying, you know, what is attractive, what's appealing to that home for that buyer. And they might pull up 10 properties that are in all different areas, but there's something specific that they're looking for. And I think it's important that when we're doing a market analysis, that's our mindset of saying, okay, I got a buyer coming in from out of town. If they're looking at this property, what other properties are they looking at on the market? Because that's really going to be a determining factor of the value of the home.
Absolutely. I think it's the motivating factor. Why would somebody buy this property over something else? Is it the location? Is it Old Northeast? Well, I want to be in walkable distance. Is that really it? You know, or is it, I want a large home for my family to be able to, you know, have room around to run around the lots, you know. I'm dealing with for example, working with a buyer right now. They live in Old Northeast, and we've been looking in Old Northeast. Just come to find out, she's pregnant again. And so that's really a sort of the motivating factor. And even though they're looking at some of the larger homes in Old Northeast, recently we started sort of getting out of there and looking at some of the other areas sort of just away from downtown a little bit, for the simple reason because they kept talking about yard. And I want a large yard. Okay, well, finding a 1.5 or 2 lots in Old Northeast, is expensive and challenging. Is that really the most important thing to you? And although, they were, young couple, they recently had twins and now actually pregnant again. And so things have changed quite a bit. They love the idea of downtown. They love walking to to everything, but now those motivations have changed. And so it really is important to understand what it is. People talk about, I want to live on the water. Well, do you boat? You just want to view. If I just want to view, well, I could, give you all, obviously a completely different list of properties. If I want to boat, am I worried about being bridge restricted? Different things like that. And so that's when, it's really important if I'm valuing a property, I think of, the Shore Acres area, you could have a property on, like, for example, Horseshoe Lane or something like that, which is back behind all these small bridges. Might be a beautiful cul-de-sac lot, great view, but I can't boat out of that property. So would I be using that as a comparable just to say a normal canal front lot? Probably not. Yes, it's waterfront. Yeah, it might be, a couple hundred yards away. It might be across the street more or less from another property, but it's not a comparable property because that's not what that buyer is looking for.
So what I'm hearing you say is that the key is to find the motivating factors of why somebody would be buying this home, and then look at comparable homes that have similar motivating factors.
Correct, absolutely.
Okay, so what would be next for us?
Okay, so the next thing, once we figure that out and we have just basically a general idea, we know we pick the select comps that meet that motivating factor. Again, size, bedroom, bath counts, whatever it might be, you have to properly account for them. So, as I've said before, when we're dealing with, I get these all the time, the little CMAs that are, just the unadjusted price per square foot. And I say, this doesn't tell me anything. So I had this little, obviously an extreme example here, a pool, for example, in a neighborhood of modest homes, 1,000 square foot or so, has a far different value than a pool in a neighborhood that is expected, almost to where, if you don't have a pool, you're the odd man out. And the proper technique that we all talk about is what's called paired sales analysis. And really what that is lining these comparables up and accounting for the differences and seeing, how much is somebody willing to pay for that pool. So if you have identical homes right next door to each other and one has a pool and one doesn't, it's an easy substitution there. You can see, wow, they're paying $15,000 for that. And then you can attribute that $15,000 to the other comparables that may or may not have a pool. So you add or subtract the $15,000, for example, depending upon if you're comparable, if your subject has it or not. This is just, for example, this is their standard quick CMA that everybody sees. This is what I get all the time. And if you look on here, you can certainly see the price per square foot. And there's a different, there's a reasonable range here. I think this one says just random 167 to 195. Well, where am I in that? If I'm a seller of a property, I'm looking at that and I'm going, well, wow, I just want to be at the 195. Is that really where I am? So again, these are just unadjusted. They can end up with wildly different valuations. And certainly, the last thing you want is for, to inappropriately price a property. That is probably the key to it all is accurately pricing the property, sell it quickly, get a lot of activity on the property, get money in your bank account.
So while you're going through this, Marsh, I just want to make sure if you guys have questions, whether you're in the Zoom room or you're on the Facebook Live feed, please just type them in. I've been trying to answer the ones that have been coming in. They want to know if your slides are available, if you would be willing to share those.
Yeah, sure, of course.
Thank you. That would be very helpful. And then just also, guys, this is being recorded. I know that question came up as well. So if you're part of the KW family, we'll be sending out the recording on our daily email. If not, you want a copy of this recording, just shoot me a message in Facebook and I'll get that over to you. If you have additional questions, please make sure you're typing those in so we can get those answered. Thank you, Marsh. Keep going.
Yeah, okay, great. So probably one of the main questions I get, and probably one of the biggest, I guess, discussions is people will say, well, you know, my pool, for example, just go back to an easy example, that cost me, you know, $40,000-$50,000 to put that in. Well, that's what it should be worth. And if I was to call up every pool company, it's going to tell me it's still $40,000 to $50,000. That is not the amount of value that adds to the property. It's not the contributory value to the property. Lots of reasons for that. I don't know really proper time frame to discuss that all, but it just simply is not. And I think most people have been in the experience, have been in the business for any length of time. They recognize what we're really talking about is the contributory value of whatever the component might be: pool, living area, you know, garages, baths, whatever it might be, updating. So that's really a key thing. So, you know, and sort of just talking about that a little bit more, I keep going back to this pool example of like that modest home. Well, in a modest home, in a, you know, modest neighborhood, it might almost be a detriment, right? I've got to maintain this pool. I've got electrical bills. I've got to put the chemicals in it. You know, I've got, you know, any number of reasons this is not really desirable for me. I've got other things to spend my money on. So it might hardly have any value. I mean, you can make an argument in some places that has very little value, but obviously on the other side of that, if you're in a high-end neighborhood, it's odd. Why don't you have a pool? You don't have the money for a pool? What's wrong with you? Do I have to add a pool? Now I have to go and now I do have to spend the $50,000 to add a pool. So
let me ask this question that keeps coming up. So let's say that you got your subject property and you got your 3 comparables. Ideally, what you would want to do is find, ideally you would want to find properties that had a pool if your subject property had a pool.
Right.
Right. All right. So, but let's say that you found two properties that have a pool, one that's like the exact same house but with no pool. How would you make an adjustment for that pool?
Well, again, so it goes back to what does the market expect? Okay, and so to give you that example, you gave me if everything else is accounted for, okay, the bottom line should spit out, well, what's the difference, right? It should spit out what is these other ones are selling for X, and the other one is selling for X plus, for plus Y, so to speak. Yeah. And it's that extra number that is spit out there. So really the most important thing is to really let your comparables speak to you. Now I did go through some basic adjustments in here that might cover, you know, maybe 80% of the typical adjustments that I might have. But
well, that was just such a, I really like what you just said. That was so smart. So let's just say that you have 2 comparables with the pool and one that doesn't, and the 2 comparables with the pool are coming out at like, you know, $450-ish sales price, and the one without the pool is $400. Then right there is that difference would be what you would put as that contributory factor. Yeah,
that's exactly right. And so, well, obviously the challenge is that you're never going to find that scenario, right?
Come on, Marsh, don't bust my bubble.
Right. That's what the professors will teach you, right? It's a real easy thing, but the truth is that the 2 that might have had the pool, well, they might have been completely different than amongst themselves. One might have been remodeled. The other one might have been larger. So I think the best way to approach this is there are probably some fairly standard adjustments that you can make. But a lot of times there is that one component that you might not really be able to get your handle on. There's just not a whole lot of experience with it. There's not a whole lot of comps. You know, for example, you know, maybe you talk about, let's just say a front footage, situation to where, they just don't have a whole lot that, have that same front footage. The best way to do it is to handle the adjustments that or you're comfortable making to begin with. So you might make a living area adjustment, okay? And then you might make a bathroom adjustment. Then you might make a garage adjustment. And then you maybe make even a pool adjustment. And then what's left over is that component that you're not comfortable with. Well, I'm not sure about this neighborhood. Like maybe a good example is neighborhoods, right? Well, if I live in, how does, Old Northeast compared to Crescent Lake or something? Not that I would really necessarily use that, but probably maybe more apt might be more of a Crescent Lake to a Crescent Heights, for example, or, a Euclid Estates or something along those lines. Is there a difference in that market or a Woodlawn? If I'm in Crescent Heights, do I compare something to Woodlawn? Well, you're going to, because you're probably going to have pretty limited comparables, but, is there a premium there? Or not. And so if that's some of the questions that you may have, the best way to do it is to make the adjustments that you feel comfortable with, okay? And what you're doing is you're equalizing those comparables, okay? And then you're left over with the one thing I don't know is there a premium for being in this neighborhood versus that neighborhood? And if you do it to enough of them, and it's not just 3, you might use, really honestly, I typically personally start out with like 9 comparables, and I sort of whittle them down, trying to figure out what I think is the best. And you look at 9 comparables and you see enough examples of where you are, and you might end up with, 3 in Crescent Heights and, 2 in Woodlawn, and you sort of see where those differences are, and you're saying, oh, well, they're all selling for a little bit more in this neighborhood. Okay, well, that could be your answer. Or they're selling for a little bit, these ones on the larger lots are selling for, an extra, $20,000 or something along those lines. And you can see those things. So take the adjustments, do the adjustments that you're comfortable with, that you feel like you have a better handle on to start with, and work towards the adjustments that have more of an unknown.
Well, just a real quick question that's here in our chat room, Marsh, and Kim Van Herwinen and asked this question, and I know where it's coming from. She does a lot with the townhomes out in Tierra Verde, and so she's asking, what's the estimated value of a boat slip deeded to a condo unit property? So like if you have, let's say that you have a townhome community and there's 16 units and you have 8 with boat slips, how would you add that value to the townhome?
Well, I mean, honestly, it's a pretty common thing. So certainly some areas, you can sell the deeded boat slips. So, for example, Waterway, I'm drawing a blank on it, but anyways, so certainly some neighborhoods you have deeded boat slips and you can purchase them separately. But provided you don't have that situation, it's a fairly common thing. So the answer is simple. You make the adjustments for the things that you might feel more comfortable with. Again, lot size, bedroom, baths. And then what is left over, so you're gonna have, let's just say you might have a selection of 4 with boat slips, 2 without boat slips. And you're trying to figure out, okay, what is that? Make those other adjustments that you are comfortable with, that you see on a regular basis. And you should see the difference there. You should see, well, the ones that are selling without a boat slips sell for, $20,000 less, for example. And again, it depends upon that market. If you're in a neighborhood, if you're on, let's say you're on Tierra Verde and it's a boating community, and people really, that's the reason why I live out here. I live in a Tierra Verde. They have, most of the units in that subdivision might, in that little townhouse community might have nice boat slips. They have big, wide. I know a lot of those out there might have some can handle some large boats. And that might be the motivating reason why the people are buying there. I mean, if you were to buy on the west side of Tierra Verde, on the deep channel right there, that might have a different value than on the east side, where you have more shallower water to maybe navigate. So those are the types of things that you want to consider. So again, what is left, work everything else out and come back to that. What is that unknown, which in this case, the boat slip. So you have examples, you have them on both sides, you know, just figure out what is that difference. And again, you may put yourself in the mind of the buyer. Why would we be buying this property? If it is for that deep water boat slip, clearly it's going to have more contributory value.
You know, yesterday we had Troy Walseth on our 9 to 10 training, and he was talking about listing consultations, and he said that you know, Kristen asked him a really great question, like what's one of the things that he's, you know, biggest impact in his learning or his ability, you know, his skill set. He said that once he started working with David Lockhart and he was looking to go on a listing presentation in a neighborhood he wasn't that familiar with, he asked David for some advice, and as David's walking out the door, he said one word, and he said, study. And what you're talking about right there, knowing the west side canal deep water versus the east side of Tierra Verde, and what one side has to offer versus the other, and what some of these units have to offer versus the other. I think, but that goes with everything you're saying. You have to study, you have to know the market, you have to know the types of homes, you have to know, you know, what's moving, what's not moving, what do buyers want, what do they not want, what areas are most desirable, and so just knowing those nuances is what I'm hearing you say, and it just goes right back into what Troy was saying yesterday of study.
Yeah, and I don't think it necessarily requires you to have extensive experience in that. I think you could sort of, for example, if you were to pull up townhouses in Tierra Verde, you might recognize that right away, or there might recognize some other differences as to why somebody wants to be on one side. Pull it up, but study the data. Don't just jump into it. Don't just throw out the quick CMA and go, well, you know, here's this big range, and I think you should be right in the middle because that's the average.
Right.
Well, yeah, I mean, it might be the average of all the townhouses on Tierra Verde, but it's not the average of comparable townhouses on Tierra Verde.
So Marsh, just as we keep moving forward, because you know, I don't want to take up too much of your time, and I so appreciate everybody asking the questions that they are. And Kim said thank you very much. That was very helpful for her. Cindy, I see your message on Facebook, and I can't. If you want the presentation for Troy from yesterday, I'm sure that Sheila can send me that email, that link, and I'll get that out to you. So, you know, tell me, what are some of the nuances that you're seeing right now in this such an uncertain market? Like, you know, I was talking to a listing agent the other day. He's got a great property listed for sale. He's had 2 contracts. Both were above asking price because the property is a great property. Both buyers lost their jobs, both contracts canceled. And the other buyers that he has are like bottom feeder investors who want to lowball. So, you know, like, how as an appraiser are you, because I think you guys have to determine if a market is increasing, stable, or decreasing. So what would you say right now is our market?
Well, yeah, it's certainly, there's really no clear answer right now. And fortunately, there's not been enough data to be able to say, hey, we're, you know, in a declining market. I mean, my personal experience has been that the sellers are saying, hey, this is a temporary situation. I'm not going to drop my price yet. I'm not going to, you know, because I think it's going to come back. The buyers are saying, well, there's a lot of unknowns here. Do I really want to buy into this if there's all these unknowns? And so me personally, you know, I've had several transactions to where I've had this gap to where sellers won't come down, buyers won't come up, and I've got this little gap right here and can't quite close that. And I get it. It's hard to, you know, it's hard to argue with either position. As an appraiser, there hasn't been enough data out there yet. And like, again, we rely on the data to tell us what, you know, if there's an adjustment. There's not enough data out there yet to be able to say that. Fortunately, you know, we can typically go back, you know, 6 months to find comparable property. Then we can actually go back further than that. But, and so prior certainly is January, you know, even somewhat February, you know, when this is before it really got affected, we can still use those comparables. And unless I've seen a dramatic drop in, like, for example, listings, if all of a sudden I see some listings drop and they're sitting on the market and they're superior properties to mine and they're priced below mine, then yes, then I'm probably going to have to start looking at making those adjustments. I've not felt the need to do that yet.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I'm a real estate investor as well, and I have a little bit different of an investment strategy. I'm not looking to buy and flip. I prefer to put like I prefer to do a lease purchase type scenario, or hold it for a couple of years and then resell it. But even for myself right now in this market, as a consumer, I see the inventory is extremely low. So typically or historically, sellers should be able to demand the price with the inventory so low. But as a purchaser, I'm too nervous, and I'm too nervous to buy it at that amount, because we don't know how long this is going to last, or what the impact's going to have on our market or our economy. Anything you would comment on that with?
Well, I mean, I completely agree with that, right? There's so many unknowns out there, and that is sort of that gap that I'm looking at. If I'm going to be buying something and I'm buying into an unknown, well, I'm certainly going to be more cautious.
Right.
The thing is, the sellers have not capitulated yet, right? They've not said, hey, okay, I will sell at this price, at least not that I've seen. But I completely agree with you. There is a lack of inventory, and certainly, you know, there's certainly an argument to be made that, hey, you know, if you are selling your property now is the time. People have taken these properties off the market. You're going to be one of the few that's available. And certainly there's still a market that people need to move. I mean, they've had things in process. They've been moving, changing jobs. They've sold their other properties. They need to move. So I think there still is, you know, sort of some people out there that definitely are still going to have to buy. So I think the market is, you know, again, I think it's somewhat, there's an unknown, and I think that's probably really affecting the number of sales. But I've not seen any definitive evidence that it's dropped yet, although I can certainly speculate that it could.
Right. Well, you know, I think what I'm realizing during that conversation, I was just reading this in the Shift book, tactic number 9. It talks about buyer urgency. And I've been saying you can take that word buyer and replace it with seller. It's the exact same thing. But and we talked about this yesterday, Michael, was that you have to have somebody that's ready, willing, and able. And so that means they're ready, they're motivated, and they have urgency. And in this scenario that I'm sharing about myself is I'm ready and I'm willing, but I don't have urgency. So I'm okay sitting back to wait to see what happens. There are people out there, buyers and sellers, though, that don't have that luxury, and they are ready, they're motivated, and they have urgency. And I think that's going to be what we need to look for, whether we're working for a seller or we're working for the buyer in this type of market. So Marsh, I got a question up here. Denise Antonowitz asked, how accurate do you think the RPR reports are?
You know, so for example, I know there's an ability to adjust those RPR reports. And so I honestly, I don't do anything without adjusting them. I mean, I really don't. I don't feel comfortable going into, you know, an appointment without actually looking at it. Maybe that's just my C personality, but which I learned today. Thanks.
You're welcome.
Yeah. You know, I don't feel comfortable going into it without adjusting for those. So I can't really, you know, measure that, because honestly, I haven't spent enough time to see, you know, where do they really come into, you know, exactly how accurate are they? I mean, you can look at the same, you know, any of the estimates, the Zillow estimates, the, you know, CoreLogic estimates, all those estimates, they all work off, you know, something called regression analysis, which is basically just gathering up a bunch of data, crunching the data in computer models. You know, computer models, as we've seen, can be widely off, right? So I personally just don't look at them. I only look at things once I've adjusted them.
I love what Eve Sawicki said. She said that the RPR is basically an unadjusted CMA, and that's right in line with what you're talking about.
Right.
Diana Geegan mentioned something in here about having 2 downtown St. Pete deals close 18% under list price. Now, these are both condominiums, I'm pretty sure, Diana, so you can, if you don't mind, just to respond and let me know, but I'm pretty sure those are condominiums. And guys, by the way, when you are posting in the chat room, just watch, sometimes you're just posting to the panelists instead of panelists and all attendees, so make sure that you're posting to panelists and all attendees so we can deliver that information. Diana said, yes, 2 condos, 2 separate buildings. So in the daily reports that I'm seeing statistically from the Pinellas Realtor Organization, I'm seeing a huge market difference or gap between single family residential homes and what's happening in the condo market. Are you seeing that? And what do you
to be honest with you, I just haven't had the opportunity to look at anything in, for example, a downtown condo market. And that'd pretty much be I've been trying to obviously be in the sales aspect of things. I'm not looking at things unless I'm involved with it primarily, right? Unless there's something going on. But my thought process would be, yes, I think you would see that sooner than any other market. Quite possibly because of the type of buyers that are in that market, right? A lot of times they're not maybe the people that necessarily need to move right there. The buyers are, like you were saying before, they're not the ones that, hey, I've moved to a new job, or I've got to get my kids into school or something like that. They don't have that urgency to move. They might be sitting in the situation where, okay, yeah, I know that the market is in flux. I don't have to move. And I think they just probably have more of that flexibility so they can be more cautious. And my speculation is that's the reason. Same thing for the beach. Certainly a lot of these, that we're talking about a lot of second homes. Well, listen, I'll put off my second home purchase. If I'm sitting here buying, honestly, I couldn't imagine if I'm buying a second home that I'm just going to jump into something. I'm going to be like, no, I don't need this home. It's a second home. So I'm going to be more cautious. I am going to try to, make sure I get a better deal to protect myself from any future downturn.
Yeah, and that's what we're seeing too. We're seeing a lot of people throw their condo listings on the market right now because they probably were purchased as second homes, and now they're feeling the uncertainty in the market is giving them a sense of urgency to get that off of their books. So that's what I would assume. Also though, last week we had a little mastermind session, and one of the agents said, I thought it was a great statement. Just want to know your opinion of it. She said that townhomes, why are townhomes always grouped statistically with condos? Because she finds that it's easier to put somebody who might be looking for single family residential, move them into a townhome, whereas a condo is completely different. So do you have any opinion on that?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I didn't get the question exactly.
Okay, so if you look at statistics that the Pinellas Realtor Organization or MLS pulls out, a lot of it combines townhomes and condos together. But what she was saying is it feels like she could more easily move somebody into a townhome than she could a condo. And I was just wondering if you knew why those townhomes and condos are typically grouped together.
Well, so I think it's a bit of a misnomer somewhat. People use townhomes and condos sometimes interchangeably. I personally look at the townhouse as more of a style, not necessarily an ownership, right? So if I'm a townhouse buyer, when I think of townhouse, people, I want to live in a townhouse, meaning in their minds, they're going to live in a 2-story structure with a garage on the first floor, and maybe, probably your main living area and your bedrooms upstairs. That's what I think of townhouse. Now that might be a PUD, right? Or it might be a condominium. Certainly there, some of the differences might be financing possibilities. There, from a financing standpoint, condo versus a single family, although they're still attached, that could possibly be some of the differences. But, primarily, that's where I'm looking. I'm comparing townhouses, either a PUD ownership or a condominium ownership, I'm basically considering those the same. They typically
Yeah.
have the same HOA fees. They typically cover pretty much the same things. Sometimes PUDs don't cover, for example, the roofs, which is one of the big things that you want to consider. That can be a problem sometimes. I've been in situations to where, just an aside, to where you'll literally see a row of townhomes and one roof's great, one roof needs to be replaced, and you can sort of obviously one can affect the other. That'd probably be one of the few downsides of the PUD type ownership. But in general, that's what I see. So I compare those. I'm using the same. I'm looking at either a PUD or a condo townhouse. If I'm looking for a townhouse, if I'm looking at a condo, I'm looking at a walk-up. I'm looking at a high rise. Those are really condos. So maybe that's the reason.
So just for the questions being asked, PUD is a planned unit development. So, we use our acronyms and people get so confused. So just want to make sure people understand that. So, Marsh,
you own a lot on those. That's one of the differences. If you ever look at that, just sort of, hey, what is it? What is this? Just simply look at the legal description and it says lot, whatever, it's a PUD. If it says unit or a condo unit, it's going to be a condo, even though they might look exactly the same.
It's going to be okay. So, and that's how we are taught in real estate licensing school, is that the difference between a villa, a condo, townhome, single family residential is their architectural styles. Then we get into the type of ownership and that throws it all off. So I think that's where it gets so confusing. So let me just recap a little bit here. I think it's very important what people heard you say about, like, we're looking for comparable properties that have, I don't know where my post-it note went. The motivating factors for a buyer. Correct? Was that the words? Were those the words you used?
Yep.
Okay. And then that's going to give us the comparable so that we can make adjustments to the value so that we can come up with the value for the subject property.
Right.
You talked about cost does not equal value. I love that. Cost does not equal value. It's hard though, a lot of times for sellers, to understand that. They want to tell you how much they spent on everything. Any recommendations or words, or how do you overcome that?
Well, I mean, certainly there's, personalized taste is one of the reasons. They may, you maybe explain to them that not everybody likes, perhaps, I guess it's hard to, I guess that's a sort of a trick question going into your personality types and how to properly address that. But the truth is that just from a purely analytical standpoint, not everybody likes the same things that you like. Now, I don't know what's the best way to communicate that. You're probably far better at that than I am, but that certainly is probably a main consideration. People, and I guess, like, so I think about things like condition, for example. They might have put $100,000 into this property, but it might come back at maybe to 50 to 75% of that because they tore out something that maybe was perfectly acceptable to some other people. And they're like, you know what? I could have lived with a 2005, brown kitchen. I'm okay with that granite countertop. It's okay. I don't need to pay the extra, $100,000 because now it's a gray, schemed house. They just like, listen, gray's going out. I don't know if it is or not, but it's like, it's everything runs their course. So, that could be, certainly that could be a portion of it. But yeah, I rarely ever see, unless of course the property is an absolute, a dump, is a foreclosure and they put the money into it in almost an unlivable situation, then you might get out, 100% plus. Obviously you do, otherwise people wouldn't do it, right? But in general, if you're dealing with, a decent property, and then you're comparing it to a property that's been completely updated, absolutely not. It's probably going to be something closer to 50% of the cost that they put into the property.
Okay. And then Jack Smith just asked, will you please explain a little more detail what a paired sales analysis is?
Well, a paired sales, we were talking about that before. That's when you're lining properties up and you're accounting for the differences between them. Okay. and you're looking for that one component, for example, that is, that is the unknown. So we're using that pool as an example, and I actually have a definition in here on the presentation. But you're looking for that difference, and that's what it's a principle of substitution is sort of what the basis behind it is. But it's what is left over. So you line the properties up, you account for the differences that you have a more familiarity with, and what is thrown off is that difference. That's called paired sales analysis.
Okay. So hopefully, Jack, thank you for that, Marsh. Hopefully, Jack, that explained it for you. He says paired sales analysis is an appraisal technique used to determine a feature's value within a property, such as brick facade or sizable parking lot. It sounds like you just
going to find it in here. I actually wrote that in here somewhere, but.
Well, and I just stopped your screen sharing because we've been chatting and not even going through theirs. But because we only got about, I think, 4 minutes left, give us a couple, what's one of the most important things you want to just make sure you get across today to everybody on how to do this?
Well, I think one of the things I did, my last slide, was something that everybody asked. So, okay, basically we're talking about all these things. We'll make these adjustments and do this and make these things square them all up. The problem is most people don't have any idea where to start, right? So they sit there and they say, so for example, living area, so what I see constantly is, okay, if I was to run that typical CMA, the quick CMA, it says, oh, it's a $200 a square foot is a different, per square foot. What I see common is that people just take that $200 and apply that to the differences between the size between comparing properties. So that could be a significant difference. Okay, so where it's not warranted. So you got to look at the contributory value. And so one of my last slide was I gave some general examples of the type of adjustments that we might have. So
you pull that up real quick for us.
Yeah, it's actually, if you share my screen, it's the.
You can share it again.
Okay. Okay.
There it goes.
Okay.
Yep.
So these are just some basic things. Now, I'm not guesstimating here, right? I'm just guessing that these adjustments will probably fall into 80% of the properties, not the super low end, falling down home, and not the multi-million-dollar properties. But this would probably cover something in the neighborhood of, the homes that are in the, 150, 200 to, $750,000, which I'm guessing is roughly maybe 80% of the market.
What does that mean, bedrooms only if there's market resistance? What do you mean by resistance there?
I'm sorry, say that one more time.
On bedrooms, it says only if there is market resistance, and I was just asking what you mean by that.
I get this a question a lot, and why don't you make an adjustment between 2 and 3 bedroom, between 2 and 3 bedroom homes? And so, first of all, part of the answer is, well, some of it's accounted for in the living area square footage. Okay, so in general, a 3-bedroom home might be, or you would expect it to be, a larger home. But really it comes down to what's expected in that neighborhood. What is typical? What can that buyer anticipate? So for example, maybe a situation to where a 2-bedroom, and typically we're talking between 2 and 3. He's getting into 3 and 4. It's even less of an adjustment. 4 and 5, even less. You get above that, it's almost too much, right? But between a 2 and a 3-bedroom home, for example, let's just say you're in a 1,500 square foot neighborhood, family neighborhood, where I know we should be using those terms, but family neighborhood. but the truth is, and you only have a 2-bedroom house. Well, that's going to be a little odd in that neighborhood, right? You're just going to be like, no, that's an odd situation. Where compared to obviously a 3-bedroom, which is way more common. Now, if you're in a 900,000 square foot, 1,100 square foot property, a difference between 2 and a 3. Well, what is that 3rd bedroom really? Is that 3rd bedroom really, a functional bedroom, or did they just cram all these, or did they convert a utility, an enclosed porch or a garage or something to make this 3rd bedroom? And it's not really, maybe ideal living space. But more importantly, maybe that third bedroom, maybe it's a 900 square foot. We've all seen them, a 900 square foot house with a legitimate 3 bedrooms. Well, I mean, these bedrooms, to get in there, you're crammed together. That means your living room's smaller. That means your kitchen's smaller. That means obviously the bedrooms themselves are smaller. Is that really as desirable as a 2-bedroom home? That, hey, listen, I don't have a bunch of kids. I just me and my partner, and we've got, we have an office space, and it's all totally fine, and we're fine with that 1 extra bedroom. So that's what I'm talking about. Just really got to look at that market, and again, goes back to what is the motivating factor for somebody buying this property in that market.
Right. I love that you got down here, solar systems, not enough market data, because I know that comes up. Peggy Wolf was asking about impact rated windows, but that's probably not that much of an adjustment either, is it?
Well,
depends on the house size.
Again, it sort of goes again to the neighborhood and what's expected. If it's a waterfront house on the open water, yes, you're gonna see more of that. If it's the middle of Brandon or something like that, okay, that's fine. I'm not going to pay that much extra for it. So, I mean, if I was to say, compare it to, let's again use an example of something in the middle of town, an insulated window that's not impact resistant versus an impact window, you're probably not going to see much difference. And I don't think anybody's ever really gone through the buying process and had your buyer sit there and say, oh, list out impact windows, updated kitchen or whatever. They don't really list it out and put a dollar amount on that. I think it just sort of goes into the overall flow of their perception as to what that property is like.
Yeah, I agree. Well, Marsh, we are out of time. I can't tell you how much I appreciate you coming on and sharing this information. I'm seeing all the people on Facebook and also in our Zoom chat room, loving the data, the information, the facts that you're providing them, the knowledge. So thank you so much for being part of our office and for sharing your wisdom with us. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome. And I'll make that available to you, that slide presentation.
Okay, thank you so much. Have a great day. Talk to you soon.